Hi, Misha here, and this is half of a two-part video looking at a very interesting, unique, secret special weapon of the Japanese Empire, specifically the Japanese Navy of World War II. In the other half, I focus more on the submarine carrier, the I-400 class, long-range aircraft carrying submersible. And in this half, I focus on the aircraft which was designed specifically and specially for its use. Now, as with most of my subs, this is a 1/350 scale from Atlas Editions. And as with a lot of my Japanese airplane models, this is a 1/72 scale diecast from De Agostini, which kind of took over the old IXO. And there's an interesting story of how I got this aircraft, or rather nearly did not get this aircraft. This is the Aichi M6A Seiran. As you can tell, this is a float plane. This was designed specifically for the I-400 submarine. It was produced in limited numbers very late in World War II. But its origins are actually at the beginning of the war. Right after the successful attack on Pearl Harbor, Admiral Yamamoto envisioned a fleet of aircraft carrying submarines that could carry 2 torpedo or dive bombers around the world. The goal was they would either be able to make a trip to anywhere on the world once, or make a trip closer in 3 times. And he wanted these so Japan could strike the American coast, both west and east, bringing the war to the civilians and hopefully putting a quick end to the war, which was Japan's goal all along. Now, the submarine we'll talk about in the other video, of course, its development. But of course, it would need an aircraft to go with it. In June of 1942, a fleet of 18 such carriers was authorized after a study was done, and Aichi was requested to design an aircraft that could fit and function from it. The new plane needed to have a range of over 800 miles and a speed approaching 350 miles per hour. It also needed to be able to carry a Type 91 torpedo or an equivalent bomb load of roughly 1,900 pounds. And it, of course, would have to fit in the hangar deck of the I-400. And originally, these were actually not even envisioned with floats. Basically, they were just going to launch them, and then when the pilots were done, they would ditch the planes and the sub would recover the pilots. But very quickly, they decided to make floats an option to attach to recover the planes. So, Aichi started off with the D4Y1 allied named Judy, which was a compact single-seat monoplane dive bomber. They tried to make this work with the design of the I-400, but it just wasn't happening. So they ended up making something all new. Now, despite Yamamoto's death in 1943, the program, while it was scaled back, first to 9 carriers, then 5, it continued. And in October of 1943, Aichi unveiled the first prototype, which it designated as the AM-24. And test flights began in November of that year, and the military designated it as the M6A1, with the name of Seiran. The Allies actually never gave it a code name because they didn't know it existed until the war was already over. Initial test flights were promising but showed some issues, so they had to iron those out. But in early 1944, full-scale production was authorized. So what do we have? Well, it's not a small plane. It's a 2-seater. We have a pilot, and we have a observer, aimer, gunner. It's 38 feet long, 40 feet wingspan. Didn't quite hit the maximum speed they were hoping. It can't quite get up to 300 miles per hour, but close. And not quite the range they were hoping for, but it could get out past 700 miles, so not bad, all things considered. Now, its defensive armament was limited to one 13mm machine gun, Type 2 machine gun, which is basically a .50 caliber. And its offensive armament was the one Type 91 torpedo, or it could carry an 1,875-pound bomb, or it could carry a couple of smaller 550-pound bombs, what have you, with the main mounting underneath. It did not have landing gear, and again, the floats were optionally attached. They could also be jettisoned in flight if necessary. Pretty conventional aircraft otherwise, except had a lot of folding going on. The wings would rotate 90 degrees and fold up against the sides, and the tail would fold down, and that's so they could fit in the aircraft carrier's hangar bay. It measured 11 feet wide and 102 feet long. Now, originally, Yamamoto envisioned the I-400 to carry 2 of these. But, thanks to kind of reworking the design and improving things a bit, they were able to get 3 on board. And so production went underway. The first production model rolled off the assembly line in October of 1944, but obviously by this point Japan's war was going a different direction than it had been in 1941, 1942. And then in December, there was the Nagoya Earthquake, which damaged the factory where these were being assembled. And just as they were picking up the pieces in March of 1945, the factory was hit pretty heavily by an Allied bombing raid. So deliveries were delayed. Nevertheless, in January of 1945, the air crews and submarines started training with these and preparing for their first mission. Now, originally, the idea that was being drawn up in the spring of 1945 was to send these against the locks of the Panama Canal. It was felt that the locks on the Atlantic side were more vulnerable and more damage could be done, yet the Pacific side, even though it was more defended, would be more detrimental. So it was decided to go after that. Now, at this point, as I said, the sub fleet had been cut to 5. Well, only 3 were basically nearing completion in 1945, and of those, only 2 were finished out as carriers, I-400 and I-401. I-402 was actually finished out as a tanker and resupply, and the other 2, I-403 and I-404, were never completely finished, even though they were laid down. So we only have 2 aircraft carrying subs with 3 each. Then they did supplement the fleet, which was known as the Special Submarine Attack Force, with 2 smaller subs, I-13 and I-14. These were Type AM submarines, which were designed as command and control, and they were originally designed to carry reconnaissance aircraft. So they did have provisions to carry aircraft, and they were able, with a bit of finagling, to get each of those to carry 2 Seirans each. So the entire attack force had 10 aircraft, which could deliver 10 torpedoes, 10 large bombs, or 20 small bombs. My point is, that's not, even with a surprise attack, that damaging when you consider the huge bombing raids seen in World War II. And they kind of knew this was becoming a fool's errand. In fact, after the bombing of the factory and other things, the whole project was canceled in March of 1945, just leaving the existing aircraft and submarines. They would end up making a total of 29 of these. 8 were prototype / pre-production M6A1's. 2 were actually 2-seat M6A1K trainers. They were the same plane, except the tail didn't fold, and instead of having floats attached, they actually had retracting landing gear. 18 were standard production models like this one, and 1 was another prototype, an M6A2, which was a planned upgraded version with an uprated engine and improved propeller, but it obviously never went past 1. Nevertheless, they were preparing for their strike on the Panama Canal, but then in May or June of 1945, the plan changed. It was realistic that this would never come to be, a strike on the Panama Canal, and American forces were gathering at Ulithi Atoll, including several carriers, destroyers, battleships, troop ships, and this was in preparation for an invasion of the Japanese homeland. So, pretty much at the last minute, the target of this mission was changed to the amassing American forces at the atoll. And the mission actually was sent out on July 23rd. The 4 aircraft carrying submarines left Japan, and they each kind of took their own course. And we're going to meet up at a rendezvous point. But things didn't go to plan. The rendezvous was missed and changed, yada yada. One of them was lost at sea, one of the smaller AMs. The 2 400's did survive. And what they did underway, you'll notice something about this airplane by now. Hopefully I've got it on camera. It's not wearing the rising sun, the Japanese meatball. It is wearing American stars. This was quote-unquote camouflage. They were hoping to further the sneak attack by painting the aircraft in American colors, therefore sowing a lot of confusion. This is highly illegal by the rules of war, and more importantly, the Japanese pilots themselves were incensed. They were outraged. It wasn't honorable, it wasn't right, and they did not like flying under enemy colors. But they were ordered to by their commander, and there just wasn't really any choice. But luckily for them, on August 16th, a recall order was sent in from Japan for the task group to return home, announcing the surrender. So they changed course, albeit reluctantly. Maybe not so reluctantly, the 6 Seirans on board the carriers were ditched. I-400 just kind of rolled those off the deck. I-401 was a little more dramatic. These were launched using a steam catapult. At least that was the plan. Well, they just steam catapulted off the deck without ever unfolding the wings or tails, so just splash into the ocean. They also realized quite early on, the pilots did, that these were kamikaze missions, that they weren't being equipped to return home, and they did not really like this. Contrary to belief, most Japanese pilots, especially when they didn't volunteer, when they were just kind of told they were doing it, weren't all that keen on kamikaze. I mean, some were, but others, especially in the Navy, I don't know. They didn't seem happy. This was a special group that had been training hard for a long time for this mission. So they'd been kind of insulted, first by being commanded to fly under enemy colors, and then kind of finding out secondhand that they were not returning home. So the planes were ditched overboard, and then just a couple of days later, the carriers themselves were intercepted and captured by the Americans. And they were actually studied up until 1946 and then scuttled. But as for the Seirans themselves, of the 29 total built, only one survives today. It was actually the final one to come off the production line, so it was still in Japan when the war ended versus being out in the ocean. It was surrendered to the Allies, and it resides in America after a restoration in the Smithsonian. Like I said, it's a pretty conventional plane, but the whole concept behind it is really cool and interesting. So that's why I kind of went to great lengths to get both of these models. Again, this has its own video. I'm not sure which of these I'll publish first. This was the largest submarine of World War II, and actually the largest submarine up until the late 50s. You can find those Atlas I-400's in America, but you can't really find these M6A's. Now, Aichi has been selling some of the new D'Agostini airplanes. They've done the Zero, and they've done the Tony and such, but they haven't done a Seiran. So I ended up buying this and importing it from Tokyo, Japan. And because my timing is excellent, I bought it really right as COVID was getting going. And I bought a couple of other things around the same time, including the Chinese J-20 jet, which came actually early. This got to America, no problem. It was scheduled for delivery on March 27. Got to California, got in transit to Texas, and then just completely disappeared. Absolutely just gone off the radar. I checked it occasionally, nothing. And I thought, well, I guess it's a goner. Really unfortunate because I really wanted it, but with everything else going on and all the things people are suffering, I'm not going to complain. And it wasn't the seller's fault, so I even told my wife, I said, I hope he has insurance because I'm not going to make him pay for it out of pocket. But then, on Good Friday, last Friday, April 10th, as Jay was coming over to pick me up to go to the range, this just randomly showed up in the mail. No announcements, no anything. It just jumped from, kind of disappeared somewhere between California and Texas to being at my door. and the package was pretty beat up, the outer box at least, but luckily the inner box, these are packaged pretty dang well, was fine, and I'm happy to report the aircraft is fine. And I'm also happy to report this is a really cool model. I would have felt kind of bad if I waited so long and it sucked. It comes with the floats pre-attached, which is nice for stability. They're made of plastic. They sit on this unique stand. I'm not sure. I bet it's kind of meant to mimic the... there's a special carriage they use to haul these out from the hangar onto the deck to get them on the catapult. And it's kind of made to resemble that a bit. But then the rest of the plane is metal. So it's actually a very heavy model. Now the De Agostini, the AXO, they don't do pilots. They do gear up or down, but this didn't have gear, so that's not a thing. But at least it does have a spinning propeller, as you've seen. And while it was a despicable move of war, I think it's interesting that this version has the camo. They do have another version where it's just in Japanese markings, but I thought that this kind of adds to the interesting story. Plus, as far as combat use, this is as close as it ever came as far as appearance. So, I went with this. It just comes off the stand, it just sits on a couple little pegs. So yeah, after a couple of weeks overdue wait, a month total, I got this in. I had the I-400 in, so I was finally able to do this set of videos. I hope you found this interesting, and I hope I got something on camera for you. If you like Japanese planes, I try to cover as many as I can get my hands on. Any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. And also, if you haven't, check out the companion video. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon next time.